There's really few things that bug me more than someone ranting about how Title A is exactly like Title B, but will start pitching a fit if I dare to say something is exactly like World of Warcraft, as if that's the one thing people aren't allowed to compare things to. When I reviewed Brick Force, everyone ranted on about Ace of Spades. When I reviewed Vindictus, everyone went on about C9. When there's a popular or well-made title, there's going to be other titles that borrow aspects from these games. It's just the way it works. And mentioning these is going to be part and parcel. And that brings me to this title, brought endlessly to my attention after my side quest on World of Warplanes. This one, however, was a near non-stop barrage of people telling me it exists from every place that you could leave a comment, as if the game was clearly the better of the two titles, and me not looking at it was some great injustice.
So, let's see what all the World War I and II era military combat fuss is about. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at War Thunder.
War Thunder, formerly known as World of Planes before changing their name to War Thunder, to both differentiate the game from Wargaming's World of Warplanes, and to illustrate the fact that the game eventually plans to go beyond simple aerial combat. More on that later. Still technically an open beta and developed and published by Gaijin Entertainment, War Thunder is an aerial combat wargame / arena shooter / sim where you choose from several planes from a list of countries and take them into various battles, both in arcade style and in reenactments of historical battles.
Sound interesting? Or more interesting than World of Warplanes? Okay, let's start.
One thing you might notice right off the bat, it's a really nice looking game. It delves even further into the realistic than World of Warplanes does, and it gives an overall grittier sense to the graphics, the planes having a bit of use and wear on them even before you take them into battle, and the overall area is filled with atmospheric effects. It's pretty impressive overall. It's also a far grittier and generally better graphic experience than World of Warplanes, showing damage on individual portions of your planes with decent smoke and fire effects. Flying into clouds or fog is especially impressive, making the game nothing more than a dusky white until you fly out of it, slowly revealing the landscape below you, or occasionally revealing you're about 5 seconds from flying into the side of a mountain. Preset graphic settings are available on the launcher, with one setting, Movie, being a setting the game advises you not to play the game on, instead using it to showcase the graphics for videos or screenshots. I've had people tell me that the graphics work just fine if they have the card for it, but I kept my settings on the default high for the sake of simplicity. See what works best for you, and of course, if it's all about the experience for PvP, I hear most people prefer to play these games on low anyway. As expected from a military-themed game, the game uses a lot of orchestrated, period-specific music. It features plenty of classical pieces and classical-styled pieces composed by Jeremy Soule of Guild Wars 2 fame. It's great music, but once again, and trust me, I'm getting just as sick of having to say this, you'll barely notice the soundtrack over the sound of the game. I highly encourage you, if you're a fan of the soundtrack, to go ahead and give it a listen outside of the game if you can. This is, of course, due to the inherent fact that planes are very loud things, and when coupled with machine guns, bombs, and explosions, you won't have much time for the soundtrack. Sound is handled very well, though, with each plane having a distinctive sound and each gun making a different sound. There doesn't seem to be much in the way of stock effects here, which is always a good thing. There's even a nice touch in the sound being relative to your view, where if you choose to switch your view to cockpit mode, the whir of your plane's engines will drown out almost everything else. There's also an announcer-style voice work giving you warnings and general match updates. While there can be an occasional odd disconnect between the arcade mode's announcer being obviously American-styled, despite the country that you're flying with, historical battles and other modes have announcers that are more in tune to the country, having distinct accents and language for each of them. It's a nice touch compared to the everyone gets the same dull voice treatment that was seen in World of Tanks. It's good work all around. Starting out, the game will take you to the launcher, where, as I mentioned in graphics, you can choose between the available presets for graphic options if you wish. You'll also find that several updates and news posts, some of which have had a bit of unintentional hilarity. I know the game is based on historical events, and that the following was posted in commemoration of VJ Day, but I don't know, it struck me as odd the way it was posted on the launcher.
So yeah, first time I log into the game, I'm greeted with a message that says, September 2nd, 2013, end of World War II. Damn, that went on way longer than I thought.
Starting the game will flash a prompt asking you what control type you wish to use and configure. While I use mouse and keyboard, you can choose to play with a gamepad or flight stick if you want a more sim-like experience. Not to mention that mouse and keyboard isn't ideal for a certain mode of gameplay. The hangar screen is certainly intimidating, but there's a reason for it, and once you wrap your head around what and where everything is, it becomes a lot easier to comprehend. First off, look in the top bar for game modes, as I highly advise checking into the tutorials area, as it's a pretty comprehensive set of tasks that spell out the game's quirk for you, and grant you rewards for completing them. If you're still not confident enough to go up against other players, you can choose missions from this menu, where you can play as offline single-player scenarios. On the bottom of the screen, you might notice the tabs reading Aviation, Army, and Fleet. Clicking on any tab but Aviation will get you an error message that reads, "This feature is not available yet." This looks to be where the game is going to link to a tank and battleship combat game, which I am greatly looking forward to. It's also the reason that this game is now called War Thunder, not World of Planes, as all three combat aspects will be reachable from the same installed game. It's a nice feature to look forward to, and I'm wondering how the game will handle tank and ship combat. I'm not going to go too much into controls, except on how they work in arcade mode, with mouse and keyboard. And yes, this is by default, everything can be moved around. To steer the plane, point in the direction that you want to fly. Keep in mind that there are two cursors. The circle is your intended path, and the crosshair is the way your plane and guns are actually facing. Even if the circle is lined up with an enemy plane, that doesn't guarantee you're going to hit it if the crosshair isn't lined up. Not to mention you'll need to lead your shots if you want to land any hits, and this is made only slightly easier with the guide that appears once you middle-click to target an enemy. Left-click to fire your guns, right-click to zoom in, and hit V to change your perspective, and if you're equipped with these weapons, use Control for rockets and Space for bombs. Since controlling your plane can actually be a bit complex if you're not in arcade mode, to the point that steering incorrectly or traveling too fast can literally rip your plane apart, the game defaults to an instructor mode and you happen to make a mistake and corrects it accordingly. Anytime you see instructor flashing on screen, it's compensating for something that would have normally destroyed you or at least messed up your plane. If you're a bit more into the sim aspect of the game, rather than just simple point-and-click dogfighting, remember that in addition to arcade, there's also historical battles and full real battle modes. Arcade controls as I listed above, simplifying the controls greatly and giving you a very simplistic task, usually eliminating ground targets or the enemy players. In arcade you have 3 lives, for lack of a better term, to start out, and you can earn more. When you start playing as a country, you have 3 planes unlocked, each with a similar makeup, and as you go on, you can unlock more planes and slots with the in-game currency Silver Lions. You can unlock up to 5 total slots in the in-game currency before you're required to use the paid currency Golden Eagles. When you're in an arcade match and your plane is destroyed, you can enter the battle again with another plane if you have a slot in reserve. Only after you've lost all available planes will you be forced to play spectator or just leave the match. Historical battles restore some of the sim play, but not enough to where the game will seem unapproachable. These will pit you in country or Axis and ally only teams, recreating actual battles that take place, with a more clear-cut goal in mind, such as taking out an enemy base while the other side is trying to defend it. Or one side escorting a fleet of bombers to an area while the other side seeks to destroy those bombers before they can reach their destination. In historical battles, it's possible you'll have to take off and land on airports or even on aircraft carriers to complete your objectives, so get used to how that works in a tutorial if you've been playing nothing but arcade mode. For the truly hardcore, there's the full real battle, where you might as well be using a flight stick. All of the hazards of flying will be present, and you'll have to keep an eye on your flight speed, your fuel, your ammunition, and you'll have no helpful lead guides to let you know if you're making hits connect. Oh, and you can't use your mouse to steer, must control your ailerons, rudder, and rear elevations manually, and you can only view the game from the cockpit. Y'all have fun now.
To even queue up for a full reel battle, you have to complete the tutorial in full reel. I can't even get the plane off the ground.
To start a battle, hit the To Battle button when you have a country selected. This is also where you can choose what game type that you wish to play. There's quite a bit to keep track of when upgrading, and while I feel it's a lot easier to upgrade planes in this game than it is in World of Warplanes, you just need to know what is all available to upgrade, as it does get somewhat confusing. There are 2 levels to gain in this game, your player level and your country's level. Player experience is gained with each battle, and regardless of what country was chosen. Country levels are only gained when flying with planes of that country. Makes sense. However, in addition to that, each plane in each country also has its own experience bar, and that experience is directly correlated to what you can upgrade on the plane. Somewhat. Let me explain. You notice that there's slots for better engines or weapons. When you click on them, it'll say that you cannot purchase this upgrade unless your experience on that plane reaches a certain level. But this can be completely overridden with paid currency if you actually wish. I'll have more words about that in the cash shop section. In addition to all of this, your slots are actually your crew, which can be upgraded with crew points. Early on with planes that are only manned by pilots, it's pretty easy to upgrade this, and doing so will allow you to sustain more damage in combat, withstand sharper turns and steeper dives, and increase your overall shot accuracy. But the cost to upgrade the crew skills increases exponentially with every few levels. What's nice about this feature is that the crew training stays with the slot, not the plane. Switch out your plane, you'll be asked to pay a small fee for the crew to learn the new plane, but you'll keep all your upgraded crew skills to use on that new plane. Another really nice feature, but made only slightly worrisome by something else I'll mention later on, once again in the cash shop. I really like how much more involved everything in this game is when it comes to the way things control, and how you upgrade your planes. I'm greatly looking forward to see how the other facets of combat will be handled by War Thunder. Until then, we'll have to keep flying. Now let's just get into who we'll be flying with, or against. You know, after my first few matches, I was going to speak about how this game's matches seemed really quiet, and figured the game was a bit more involved, and didn't really lend itself to text chatter. Man, I wish it had stayed that way. There is a lot of complaining and smack-talking going on in this game. Players whine when they get shot, they whine when they crash, they whine if they're losing, and they generally spend more time complaining than they do flying. I've had a fair share of good matches, but there's a lot of people who just cannot keep their mouths shut, and usually not for any legit reasons. Friendly fire in the game is not only possible, it's likely that you will be shot by it. From your teammates. Possibly on purpose. I wish I could count the number of times my plane was shot to hell by my teammates, because they'll be unloading their entire ammo cache into the plane in front of me, and they'll be damned if I happen to be in the way. They'll also get stupidly close to your plane and crash into you because they would rather be in a better position to fire on an enemy plane than let you have a crack at it. Granted, this was mostly what I've seen in the Tier 0 to 1 and 2 to 3 level arcade battles, and historical battles seem a lot more civilized. If your teammates aren't ramming into you, it's possible that the enemy might try to do it instead, most likely in arcade mode. Consider that there is a pool of equally expendable planes waiting in reserve. Sometimes in arcade, your plane will be so badly beat up that turning it into a live missile might not be the worst option. If you forget, you can often just fly back to an airfield and repair it. Just be prepared to lose your favorite plane to a game of mid-air chicken if you're not careful. As I mentioned before, the game types vary in arcade mode, but usually have a similar goal, oftentimes just requiring each team to take out the ground targets. Much unlike World of Warplanes, where the ground targets are just one means of victory and not really the most desired route compared to destroying everyone on the enemy team, ground targets are far more important in War Thunder. Each team has a set number of ground targets, and the first team to destroy all of the enemy targets will win. While you might think that it's just better suited to kill off the enemy team, like in World of Warplanes, just remember that whole reserve plane thing, and you'll soon realize that the opposing team of 15 or so players could be as many as 50 enemy planes you'll have to shoot down, as opposed to a simple 25 ground targets. So many matches end up being lost by teams who just rather dogfight their way to victory than do the actual team objective. Another cause of strife in the game, and mostly probably due to ignorance. As I mentioned about the tiers thing, matches are set up at the highest tier plane that you bring into battle, so if you're proud of that tier 4 assault plane you just bought, and you only have tier 0s in reserve when that plane is inevitably shot down, good luck tickling all the other high-end planes to death when you have no other planes that can handle the match level. Try to keep your planes in or near the same match tier until you unlock more higher tier planes. Queues also vary by the tier planes that you're matched with, the country you chose, and the kind of match that you wish to play. You're given a nice estimated time to wait for each battle, and while it's really easy to get into the arcade battles, historical battles take a little bit more time to get into. And despite the fact that I can't play the full real tutorial without flipping my plane over on the runway, I hear it's so much harder to get into those queues. So yeah, if you want to get right into the game, give arcade a shot, but just be prepared for some jerkishness. If you want to balance realism with your action, focus on the historical battles as long as you don't mind a longer wait. As mentioned earlier, the cash shop currency is called Golden Eagles, and you may earn a few early on when you start out. Unsurprisingly, because of this, they are rather cheap, with a good amount of Golden Eagles granted for pretty low amounts of money. And similar to Wargaming's titles, Golden Eagles can be spent on a lot of things. First off, there's the decals, which lets you customize your plane with things like pinup models, army and squadron symbols, among other things. An interesting thing about these decals is that they act like achievements. While you can outright buy these decals, you'll also notice that you mousing over any of the locked ones, that you can just earn them by performing specific feats. It's an interesting touch for the system that makes it far beyond simple customization options. Of course, as the game will point out, just like the wargaming titles will, there's an option to buy a premium account which acts as a permanent XP and in-game money booster. You can purchase these in various time periods, just like the other game. Also, similar to the oft compared other titles, is the ability to buy the premium planes, which come fully upgraded, but the game does occasionally offer premium planes for certain events. Just keep an eye out. Now here's a major difference in the use of gold compared to World of Warplanes and tanks versus War Thunder. You can override the XP requirement and outright purchase the upgrades available for each plane, giving you an immediate advantage to others in the match. The same can be done to speed up your crew training, gaining a lot of points for crew upgrades with just a bit of gold as well. Of course, there's also the ability to convert your free XP pool to speed up the progress of a certain country. While I could see the possibility of pay-to-win arguments here, I feel the game takes a hell of a lot more skill than just the upgrades are going to give you. And it requires the players to still be actually good at the game, rather than just be willing to spend the most money on it. I was taking out players in Tier 2 to 3 matches with my Tier 0 reserve starter plane. I'm just saying that there's probably better things to be worried about spending money on, like extra crew slots. The premium account is a good way to support the game, and it's not like too much of an investment any way you look at it. If you like it, support it. Despite the storm of people asking me to look at this, I wasn't exactly disappointed after I checked it out. I can see why people would want to point this game out whenever World of Warplanes is mentioned, as even though both games are technically an open beta, War Thunder seems much more refined and involved than the other, but that doesn't necessarily make it better. If you're more into jumping into matches and arcade-style action, Warplanes might suit you better, but if you're looking for a lot more options, customization, and complexity in your aviation combat, give War Thunder a look. Here's my final rating. If you wanted a more true-to-the-period aerial combat sim with a lot of personal involvement and control, War Thunder really shines. The multiple levels of play fit well for more casual players, as well as those looking for something that's much more sim-like. Lastly, if you think the company handled air combat pretty well, and you really want to see what they might do with a tank or a warship combat title, keep an eye on this one. Golden Eagles, being cheap as they are, tend to go decently far for what you pay for them. Using them to upgrade your planes might seem a bit of a pay-to-win, but the edge isn't game-breaking, and it really just cuts down on the time spent you'd get to full potential. More crew slots really help you get a better group of planes to bring into a battle, if the match rules allow, so it's not bad to have a few more on hand once you can no longer pay for them in Silver Lions. Finally, the premium accounts and planes are a good way to get the most out of your matches, or to have a decent plane for your matches respectively. If you don't like the idea of aerial combat, and with this game being focused on making it as legit as possible in a video game form, you're probably not going to like this if you don't like the genre. At least maybe not until they release the tank or the ship combat options. Since it's really trying so hard to play more like a sim, even the arcade combat is far more involving and difficult than other games like it, and it might not be casual enough for some players, especially those used to World of Warplanes. Since the gameplay is overall tougher as well, if you find yourself wondering why your screen is blacking out when you perform a tight turn or a dive, you might be better off somewhere else.
Next time, I'll be looking at a game that's apparently set to launch, although I'm not entirely sure it's ready for that.
Check your speed and altitude. Ready? Go for a landing.